So welcome everyone to today's call. This is the third session of our open source tools trial series, and it's focused on OpenReview, which is an open source platform for peer review. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emily, and I'm a project and community manager here at CSCCE, and I'll be facilitating today's call along with our communications director and content archivist, Katie Pratt. So the presentation portion of this call will be recorded, but the Q&A will not be. So we'll start with just a little bit about CSCCE. We champion the importance of human infrastructure for effective collaboration in STEM. And we do this by providing training and support for the people who make collaboration successful. And these are the scientific community managers. So how do we do this? We do this in a few ways. We develop and publish resources, including frameworks, guidebooks, and tip sheets that address topics that are central to scientific community engagement. We also provide professional development opportunities, including trainings, webinars such as this one, and consultancy. We convene a community of practice that contains more than 600 community managers from around the world, where folks can crowdsource solutions, get peer support, and access programming. And lastly, we conduct research to characterize scientific community managers as well as the communities that they support. So today's session is just one example of the types of programming that we offer to our COP. And if you're interested in learning more about any of these types of offerings, you're welcome to email us at info@cscce.org. So to give a little background about our tools trial series, I know we have a few new faces here in the room today. These sessions are intended to help STEM community managers to explore various online tools. And so this series started in 2020 when the onset of the pandemic prompted a shift to virtual collaboration. And now, thanks to support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, we're about halfway through our 5-part series of trials focused on open source projects, tools, and platforms that facilitate collaboration and convening. We'll also be producing a series of tip sheets to consolidate what we learn, and you'll be able to find recordings of demos on our YouTube channel, as well as recap blog posts of past trials on our website. So there are a few ways to participate during today's call. We take notes in a Google Doc that Katie just shared in the chat. And you can find information about our community participation guidelines, our core values, and virtual event safety policies right at the top. Throughout today's call, we invite you to sign in. You can provide your name and affiliation. You can answer our opening prompts. You're welcome to take notes throughout the presentations and also jot down questions. We are delighted to have 2 guest speakers today from OpenReview, and we plan to hold questions for them until their presentations are over. So we ask that you please leave your questions in the notes doc rather than in the chat, which helps us to moderate the Q&A session, and that also allows speakers to respond in writing if they have the capacity to do so. If you have resources to share, you're also welcome to include them in the resources section. And lastly, toward the end of the call, we would appreciate it if you could take just a couple of minutes to complete our very brief survey to share with us what you learned from today's session, as well as any feedback that you have for us. So if you're new to our community, we would love to have you join our Slack workspace, where you can connect with other community managers and also learn about our upcoming programming. You might also consider joining our open source special interest group, which is co-led by Sarah Petty from the Open Knowledge Foundation and Bree Johns from the Gathering for Open Source Hardware. You're welcome to sign up for our mailing list. And we invite you also to pencil in the next call in our series on your calendar. And this call will focus on GitHub for research and developer communities. So in this call on October 11th, we'll be introducing GitHub Teams and Bitergia as tools to better manage and understand contributor activity. And we'll also learn how the Czar community uses GitHub to collaboratively write technical documentation. So today, we'll be starting with a recap of the first 2 trials in our series, in which we're introduced to how to use GitHub for transparent organization of community events, as well as Markdown for collaborative writing. I'll then introduce 2 example use cases of OpenReview from our own CSCCE COP to help you think about different ways you might use the platform with your community. And afterward, I'll turn it over to today's guest speakers, who both represent OpenReview. They'll give us a brief overview of their platform, show us how to set up a venue and profile, and also guide us through different options for matching reviewers with submissions, and to allow for varying levels of transparency. We'll wrap up with a Q&A and discussion. And again, we value your active participation throughout today's call in the form of adding useful links, resources, reflections, notes, and questions to our collaborative doc. So I'll take a moment to introduce today's speakers. We're joined today by Andrew McCallum, who is the professor and director of the Center for Data Science in the College of Information and Computer Sciences at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and Melissa Bach, who is senior software engineer for OpenReview. So before we start the presentations today, I'm going to pause for just a few minutes to allow you to respond to the 2 opening reflection prompts that we've included in the notes doc if you haven't done so already. So we invite you to share your level of familiarity with conference submission platforms, whether it be OpenReview or other platforms that you've used, as well as your motivation for attending today's session. And if you're comfortable doing so, you're welcome to leave your name next to your comment, and we might refer back to it during the Q&A. We also invite you to +1 other comments that resonate with you. So I'm going to pause as we transition to the notes doc for just a few minutes. All right, I see that the writing is starting to slow down. So if you haven't already had a chance, I invite you to take a look at what other people have written. And again, if something resonates with you, you're welcome to +1 it. I see that we have a whole range of experience with conference submission platforms, from people who have never used one to people who use them a lot, even someone who has already used OpenReview, so that's great. And there's also some interest in exploring different functionalities in OpenReview in terms of thinking about future conferences and other programming that people are going to be organizing in the coming months. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. So with this, I'll transition back to our slides. And we're just going to do a brief recap of what we've covered so far in our series. So today's session builds on a common theme that we've been exploring throughout this series, which is focused on transparent event organization. So in the first 2 calls of our series, community managers from Our Open Sci, the Touring Way, and the Carpentries have all demonstrated how they have used GitHub to transparently and collaboratively co-develop events with their communities. And these events include community calls, writing sprints, as well as conferences. So throughout these conversations we've had with these community managers, we've talked about the importance of meeting community members where they are when choosing tools and platforms. We've discussed the need to understand what tools community members are already using regularly, and if there's variation in expertise that might impact onboarding pathways as well as scaffolding needs. We also learned about some of the features that are built into GitHub that help users to standardize and streamline their workflows. So for example, we've learned how issue templates can be used to create forms that allow for standardized contributions, and how to use tags to categorize those contributions. We've learned about using the checklists for organizing internal and external workflows, and how bots can be used to automate repetitive tasks. So for example, to ensure that contributors are acknowledged in a timely fashion. And lastly, we've learned about the use of private versus public repositories for internal tracking of processes versus public collaboration and co-creation. And coming out of this conversation, we've also talked about the very real sense of vulnerability that can come from working in public, and the importance of having a strong, supportive community that accepts that mistakes can happen. So today we'll be expanding on these ideas as we explore OpenReview as a platform for receiving and reviewing submissions to conferences, as well as other types of programming. In our first 2 trials, we also got an introduction to Markdown, which allows users to add formatting elements such as headings and italics to plain text documents. So in trial 1, we learned how it's used to write Data Umbrella's blog, and then in trial 2, we tried it out ourselves using HedgeDoc. You can find the summary blog posts and recordings from our first 2 sessions on our website. And we are also working on a series of tech tip sheets to accompany these resources. So before we learn how to use OpenReview from Andrew and Melissa, I just want to quickly highlight a couple of example use cases from our own community of practice. So again, while the predominant use of OpenReview is for the open peer review of conference abstracts, we have some communities in our space that have co-opted the platform for other situations that require proposals, such as reviewing submissions to funding programs. So I'm going to briefly show venues from Code for Science and Society's Event Fund, as well as the Invest in Open Infrastructure's Open Infrastructure Fund. So I first became an OpenReview user in 2020 when I set up the venue or submission platform for Code for Science and Society's Event Fund. So what you're seeing here is a snapshot of part of the submission form for the winter 2021 request for proposals. So just to orient you to what these venues look like, and Andrew and Melissa will be showing you them in more detail later in the presentation. You can see the venue name at the top, and then you can see underneath that the anticipated date that funds would be dispersed. So this is the start date in our case, as well as the website, the contact email, the dates for the submission window, and then this is a snapshot of the submission form. And so I am going to very briefly switch what I'm sharing so I can show you a little bit more about our submission platform or our submission form and how we were able to customize it. Okay, so now you should be seeing our submission form, and I'm not going to go through this in great detail. But what I really want to highlight is how we were able to customize it to be able to have applicants answer the questions that we wanted. So you can see that we had several short answer questions. These are very straightforward, the applicant's name and contact information. We're also able to include multiple choice questions. You can see any question that has a star next to it is one that is required. Any without a star is optional. We're also able to include multiple selection questions that allow people to indicate multiple boxes if needed. And there's also the ability to upload files. So here there's the option for folks to upload a letter of support. And then down below, we also have the option for people to upload a budget. So these were the main things that I wanted to show, just that you can see some of the range of fields that you can include. For our longer responses, we're also able to include character counts to make sure that the submissions were all of about the same length. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is something that I found really useful as the event fund manager is not only how customizable the platform was, that was really helpful, but it was also very easy to use the affinity matching system, which Melissa will be talking about later, to be able to match reviewers with submissions to avoid obvious conflicts of interest. So the second example that I wanted to show very briefly is the Open Infrastructure Fund. So this summer, several of us at CSCCE had the opportunity to experience OpenReview as applicants. So we applied to the Invest in Open Infrastructure Fund. And this is what the venue looks like from the perspective of an applicant. So again, you can see the venue name at the top. We can see that we submitted 2 proposals. You can see our submission numbers here. And you can also see that each of our proposals received 3 reviews. So we have our submission names here. We have the authors underneath. And I'll mention that the Open Infrastructure Fund venue is completely publicly available. So I've included the link to that in the resources section of the notes doc. And so after the call, you are more than welcome to go in and explore. You can see the different proposals and what it looks like from the perspective of someone who's able to see the proposals as well as the reviews. So with that, I am happy to hand it over to Andrew, who will be giving us an overview of OpenReview.